I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. Oh, I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years, and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised, we'd be cordial.
Dr. Dabney, so grateful that you're coming on our show today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
You know, your topics that you write about, especially to do with, ways to set boundaries, noticing the red flags, being in a toxic and abusive relationship. Those are the most listened to shows on my podcast and also across our network.
Yes.
Does that surprise you?
Not
I bet
at all.
not. What do you there's so much more, and I know I'm steeped in it, and I know you are too. I'm steeped in it at another level, even with having all of these shows. There are literally some podcasts on the network that is all they talk about.
Yeah.
And there's definitely an uptick, because I've been doing this for 8 years, and there were shows, and there weren't podcasts really back then, like there are today, but there was content and things like that. But I saw about 3 years ago this major uptick talking about narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, all of that. And there's good and bad to that. I mean, I'm happy that it's out there and it's part of mainstream conversation. But what I want to ask you is, from your perspective in working with people, how have you navigated this significant uptick in knowledge, or at least awareness around it?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I've seen not only the narcissism uptick, but also sociopaths.
Yes.
So I'm talking to a lot of reporters about what we call personality disorders. But the interesting piece to me, and how I tie that all into what I see every day, because you've seen the uptick in your shows and whatnot, but I've seen the uptick in my office.
Right.
I write about what I hear people complain about or want to talk about when they're here in the office, when they give me a call. But what I find really fascinating is the dichotomy, I guess, the irony of when I'm trying to tell people, to help your relationship, you need to understand and take the time and invest in yourself and fix your problems before you give to somebody else. And they say, "Oh, isn't that selfish?" I try to explain,
Right.
It's what we call in psychiatry a healthy narcissism. Everybody has a narcissism. You are supposed to be that's what adult means, right? Isn't that the definition? We take care of ourselves. We look out for ourselves, and then we give to others. But then here's this other side of the narcissism personality disorder, when it's gone, to another extreme, and people are so afraid of that. But, and I wonder if that isn't fueling the whole, well, I can't, tell my pregnant wife that I'm upset we're not having sex anymore. It's so selfish.
I think in some ways what I found is, because I remember when I first started on this journey of understanding what the heck someone who has antisocial personality or, narcissistic personality, or even a psychopath, when I first started learning exactly what that was, the worst thing that someone could say to me during that initial healing stage where you're fully triggered and around every corner is a sociopath and you must hide, that first stage that you get to, the worst thing someone could say to me was that I was a narcissist.
Yes.
So I think there's that, you don't want to be that thing that has scared you, traumatized you, and somehow we seem to have lumped that into self-care and made it a bad word. And you're right, it shouldn't be.
Right. And then I'm stuck with trying to convince people that if you don't do the self-care, what happens is whatever the emotion there you haven't dealt with because you won't unpack the bag, I call it, then that just grows and seeps out in some horrific way where you explode on somebody, or as I had a patient actually add this next piece, that you implode. You then do more self-destructive things. So that those feelings, quote unquote, negative feelings, don't go away just because you decide not to look at them.
Right. Exactly. So how do you work with people that, they've sort of, I don't want to say Stockholm Syndrome because it's not that. They're so traumatized that they've put themselves into a corner of what they can't care for themselves because it's too selfish. If they do, then they're going to be accused of being a narcissist, and that's a no-win situation.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think more fuel to that problem is a lot of us were raised to don't say anything bad about others, look after your younger sister, look after others. Oh, don't be, so to the point of, yes, it's great to help others, but the message of, okay, once you get yourself settled and set, then help someone else is not the message a lot of us got. So that's fueling to the whole, it gets all watered down to, if I help somebody to a degree where I'm totally wrung out, they'll eventually be happy, and then the relationship will work.
Right. That is not how it works.
It's not right. So that's what I keep saying. So what I have to do is catch them when they're giving me an example of when it didn't work, and then encourage them to take a small step, very small step, and we go over exactly how to say it and how to put their problem out there, or how to see, if they even can't get to that point, to see what their pain is or their problem is, and then how that works to their advantage. So it's almost like I'm unlinking. I have to unlink the taking care of everybody else makes everybody happy, and show them that that's not always the case. It's that you can't make everybody happy. It doesn't matter how much you do for everybody. There's no link there. It's a fantasy. It's a wish that they could make that link. But I have to just keep showing examples where it didn't work, and then examples of where they actually stood up for themselves to some degree, and that turned the relationship around for the better.
Yeah, it falls right in line with that magical thinking that so many of us that are attracted to narcissistic people or have been attracted to them, we walk around in magical thinking too.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I wish they would just be so easy if I just. And
yeah. Exactly. And it's interesting when you now if someone called me a narcissist, I wouldn't care.
Right.
Okay, maybe what the 10 seconds that they saw me, something I said seemed very narcissistic, and now I'm going to get labeled that. We have such a quick to label society anyway, but I have worked on my self-esteem so much, and my own self-care, being a chronic enabler that I was, that now, okay, if somebody has a negative opinion of me, it could be true. But even if it being true isn't going to cripple me either way, I'll look at it or I won't look at it.
I love that so much, because those are the words I long to hear from the couch, because that whole, essentially, I'm not going to let what somebody else's quick judgment, I'm not going to let that define me. Because whether they're calling you a narcissist, or say you're mean, or say you're selfish, or say whatever, it shouldn't matter to you. I'm not saying it shouldn't matter. It it shouldn't define you.
Right. Right. So someone I was called that years ago, a narcissist. And no one's ever said anything like that again. It's completely ridiculous. But somebody did say when I wouldn't do what they wanted me to do, I called 2019 the year of no. Somebody did say, you're such a selfish person. And it made me laugh because, oh my God, that is so not true. But I said to that, my first reaction, I thought that this is how I was gauging myself. I said, thank you. I've been working on that. And you do have, yeah, you do, if you know that you're always someone, that's doing for others. I mean, sometimes it's, that can be a form of narcissism too, because you're doing it. Why you're doing it is to get constant praise and you're always resentful. There's so many ways. That's the interesting thing about psychology and the human mind and psychiatry that I find fascinating is there's so many ways to look at something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So why was this a field that you wanted to get into?
I actually always was fascinated by why people do what they do, but especially when it didn't make sense. So it's just this, why would you do X when clearly Y is going to happen? Mm-hmm. So just the getting to the underpinnings. In 6th grade, I had a teacher who, I think when we were unruly now looking back, but she would put us in this big circle and she would go around and ask the students questions such as, Tommy, how are you feeling about your goldfish dying? And it was group therapy. We had one of our classmates broke both her legs skiing and we talked about that. And I would come home, I guess, I don't really remember this part, but I would come home and be all worked up about this and talking to my mom about it. And she's the first person to label it for me. She said, that's psychology. So ever since then, I took as many psychology courses as I could possibly take and went on to take 8 years of it in med school.
So what made you want to go to the psychiatry side? Because that, not everybody goes towards the side where they can prescribe medication, as an example, the MD side of things.
Exactly. So in my senior year at Smith College, I took a neurology of psychology course. And that teacher had me in several classes, and I talked to her a lot. And I was all excited about that class. And she's the first one to say, well, maybe you should consider medical school. Mm. And that blew my mind. No one had ever said anything about medical school to me. I didn't think of myself as a scientist in any way. And that rattled me to the point where I actually took a job which had no, I was a paralegal for several years because I had no upward ladder. I could just do that job.
Right.
And think about it. So I volunteered at several different homeless shelters and halfway homes and that kind of thing. And it was there that I realized the psychologists, social workers were there every day. Right. The psychiatrists came in once a week, had us all together, came up with these amazing insights that worked. And I thought, well, why wouldn't I go for that? As opposed to, why would I have all the options at my fingertips as opposed to limiting myself?
Right. Well, how have you, in terms of, dealing with I feel like people are more educated when it comes to personality disorders, and too educated sometimes because there's a lot of armchair psychiatry and psychology going on. A lot of people mislabeled. But how have you seen that in your practice where you've seen people have more education, but you as the professional trying to guide them into, okay, well, here's the good education and here's the nonsense?
Yeah, I'm actually doing an online Intimacy Now program. I'm re-recording it and packaging that, and that's exactly what I talk about. I mean, there's a trend now. It's both things. When someone comes in and has information about psychology, that's great. The more information they have, it's just more to work with. But the trend that I find alarming is a lot of people in all self-help genres have a problem. I solved it. Now I'm the expert and can help you with that problem. And the only problem with that is it's just a slice. They have a slice.
Right.
Not have treated and dealt with thousands of patients over 20 years where, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about that, right? The 10,000 hours. Once you get to that point, you're an expert because it all coalesces. All of a sudden, like 5 maybe a little bit more, 8 years ago, I was like, oh my God, all these problems come down to a few destructive patterns. And it was the moment for me was so amazing. It's like music coming down to all music coming down to 7 notes.
Right. Can you describe some of those?
Of the destructive patterns?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, a little bit what we're talking about is people decide a certain emotion is bad. Almost all intimacy or relation problems come down to a person declaring semi-consciously that an emotion is bad, and then I call it an enemy. They make it an enemy. They have to shove it aside. They won't look at it. They won't deal with it. They won't think about it. And what we're talking about is neediness. The people who give and give and give and give, it's in part to hide that they want to get something. They have a need. So I have to help them get comfortable and get them to believe that neediness is normal. Because they'll go on a great length about, oh, neediness is weak. I don't have needs. I'm not needy. Oh, no. I don't have, they are trying to convince themselves and me. I'm like, but neediness is normal. Not only is it normal, it's the cornerstone of all relationships. Why would you be in a relationship if you didn't have a need?
That'd be the second thing. First bad word is your first bad accusatory thing is you're a narcissist. Second is you're so needy. You're too needy.
Yeah. There's another one. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's exactly. I'm human. I have needs. That's it's a topic. It's a conversation I have with just about every patient.
Because so many men get accused of the narcissism piece, and they still do. We're seeing a lot more women come into play with that, but with Me Too and everything that's going on, you can look up someone that has narcissistic personality disorder and say Harvey Weinstein's picture next to that.
He's got a lot of problems in narcissism.
Absolutely. But the many mates that are male get accused of that. Do you feel like the education around why men get accused of that when they may be narcissistic or closed off or whatever, but they certainly don't have a personality disorder? Do you feel like that education is coming out now? It's not quite as awful as it was a few years ago with the blaming.
Yeah, I do. I think no one knew what a personality disorder was when I was in training. I mean, outside of psychiatry or psychology. So I do think people becoming aware of dangerous patterns is in other people is excellent. Because another group of people I work with are the people who can't admit to anything negative in somebody that they kind of like or are dating maybe and like. But they won't admit that there's a red flag there, that they're a narcissist, or they're have no empathy, or they can't take care of themselves, and how that's a red flag. And so they'll go on in this relationship, marry the person sometimes, even though there's these little warning signs. Again, they won't look at it. They think it's mean to, quote unquote, judge a book by its cover. So they won't look at it and act on that knowledge. So I think it's great if someone can use their critical judgment. I don't care if they're labeling the person wrong, whatever, but if they if they're heeding the warning bells, that's great.
What do you think is the reason why people, maybe not even the reason why, but how to help someone who, because I even noticed this in just standard society, just mainstream society, this, you talk about what someone is doing and it is clearly destructive, disordered, whatever is going on. It's clearly a big red flag. And polite society doesn't want to acknowledge or say, yeah, that's bad. They instead say, gosh, you sure do get a lot of crazies in your life. Or, they turn it back to the person that's on the receiving end of the behavior. I don't know how you meet these people. It's almost like it's easier to blame that on the person telling the story than it is to say, yeah, that's really messed up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't quite noticed that, but you're right. They will say, gee, you really attract the winners.
Mhm. Yeah.
Instead of saying, what is it? I see something dangerous in this person. What's going on? What's your attraction to them or something?
Right. Instead of going, yeah, that is bananas. Good
Hmm.
for you for getting away from it. I just have found, I found it just wrapped into the whole victim shaming or victim blaming culture that that we're trying to break out of.
Right.
But it seems like nice, quote unquote, nice people or polite society, it's too difficult. It's to rip the rose colored glasses off to go to see that horrible behavior. It's so much easier to shift it to the nice person because they can take it. They're not scary.
Yes, I think that's a big part of it. Right. There's also we call displacement, onto the victim or the person who's attracted to them, and there's a guilt factor involved. I found where they feel so guilty calling anybody out. They don't have to know them that well, but they feel so terribly guilty thinking anything negative about somebody.
Yes.
So they'll bury it, and then the person they know, they'll say something a little, to them instead.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. I have a friend who she apologizes for everything. Such a typical thing that especially women do. But I mean, everything. I don't even want to tell her something that it's not a complaint. I'm just having a regular conversation, but I know somehow she's going to turn that into it being her fault, and she's got to, say she's sorry for it. So I'm very careful what I say. And we've talked about that. Why do you always say you're sorry? Stop.
Right.
But I remember she introduced me to someone. They turned out to be the terror of the neighborhood, have terrorized other people in the neighborhood, including me. And I put up after 6 weeks of being around this person, I went, that's it. That's it. And I didn't care if this woman hated me and talked terribly about me, because I was like, I just want out. This person is destructive. And then I find out later, oh yeah, she's terrorized many, many other people too. But my friend is like still getting stuff from her. And oh, well, she just needs boundaries. And I thought there's a tie-in with that feeling sorry for everybody thing. You can get mad at me for having boundaries and saying no, but still, and hear everybody else talking negatively about someone that has treated them off, in a horrible way,
right,
to the lengths that are psychotic almost in some ways. But the person that's, I'm sorry, just, it's like they just can't see that. They can see that you're triggered. You just have an issue with that person. They can't see the other.
There's a term I use called constructive aggression. So a lot of these people, like you're describing, they see all aggression as bad, destructive. I find these people out and I say, so how do you handle your anger? Oh, I don't get angry. I don't hurt people. I said, well, wait a minute. How you tie anger and hurting people? Oh, yes. I mean, I don't yell at people. I don't want to hit anybody. And so I have to teach them that there's constructive aggression and destructive aggression. And if they're not able to use their constructive aggression, they get walked all over like your friend. I mean, they just can't put up a boundary kindly. They just, my sister-in-law is a little bit like this, where she just says yes to everybody, can't say no, can't negatively use her critical judgment to get away from someone who's dangerous. And it's a unique pathology.
It is. I want to just go, oh my gosh. And, the enabler in me wants to try to like rescue them, which is ridiculous, because how many times have enablers, me included, gone to someone and said, I'm going to help fix them. Well, gosh, how narcissistic. They didn't ask you to fix them. And why do you think you're some kind of expert,
Yes, that's what I say. And it can come across as condescending, fixing someone who hasn't asked for it. And they're always like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Absolutely. It's an interesting road when you self-examine and you make friends with all the parts of yourself, including the things that you really don't like.
I love that you said make friends with, because I'm always saying that I'm trying to get you to accept the side of you that you keep shunning.
Mm-hmm.
The one who has anger and neededness and
Can be
frustration and
lazy or
lazy. Yes. The
yes.
other one. No, it will. I'm not lazy. I don't want to be lazy. What's wrong with being lazy?
Right. It doesn't kill people. Okay. It's can cause you some issues here and there, but you can, whip yourself out of it. I know it's funny. It's a funny thing to, well, how do you temper that with, okay, so you have a really empathetic, lovely person that works on themselves and has learned to like their multitude of flaws that we all have, as opposed to someone who's exceedingly narcissistic, maybe even on the spectrum of personality disorder, who says that they don't see any flaws that they have, or they won't acknowledge them anyway.
Yeah, they're the ones who do the projective blame, right? Everything is someone else's fault, and because this, that, and all these excuses. They usually don't come into my office, so
Right, exactly.
I don't see them too much. Every once in a while, I will get someone who's quite narcissistic, but like, for instance, I'm thinking of one I had where his wife made him come, or she would leave him. And I literally had to get objective evidence, which he oddly gave me. It's almost like he knew he couldn't admit it. For instance, he gave me this, he kept saying got furious with, he gave feedback to one of his workers, and they just went off. They were furious, wouldn't talk to him. He couldn't understand. He goes, I said, what was the feedback? A little suspicious. He said, well, he wrote this article. I changed a sentence, fixed his grammar in one sentence. I said, you fixed his grammar in one sentence? And he went nuts. Yes. And he goes, would you like to see it? I said, I would. He gave it to me, and it was all changed. Let's say it was 3 paragraphs. He changed 99% of it, crossed out, this is ridiculous, write it this way. And I looked at him, I said, do you realize you just told me you changed one sentence?
Yeah.
And he kind of got funny looking. He's like, well, something like that. And I said, look, this is, so I have to go around. Another thing this guy did was you have to catch what doesn't make sense. So he was saying how somebody else was going off about something. So he was blameless again, so someone else going off, he goes, well, then we went in the car and went to whatever. I said, now wait, someone's screaming at you and you're telling me you just got in a car and went off to the mall? I said, that doesn't make any sense. I said, so what happened? What was your contribution here? And so I have to pull it out of him in that way. And then amazingly, they're able to then do the work. So you just have to break through that. Narcissistic is a defense against anger usually.
Yeah, I find it fascinating too that they can behave that way too. I had someone who just ripped me to shreds and other bystanders to shreds on a vacation. Now they were drinking since 10 in the morning. That added to it too. But they just were so horrible, and all of us were shell shocked. Yeah. And then 5 minutes later, they put their hand out with a bag of peanuts and said, do you want some peanuts?
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought, is this a joke? Are they messing with me?
Right.
Is this a game? And I realized that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the deal was. If they felt wonderful now that they just slammed everybody because that's how they feel good about themselves, or if they forget that they just behaved horribly, or they are able to just shut it. Who knows? I don't care to know, but it's odd. And, that's one example, but many times I've seen that with somebody where I'm like, okay, you just verbally terrorized and assaulted someone, and now you want to ask them if they'll pet a kitten. This doesn't make any sense.
And I bet you if you talk to those are the people you talk to later, that then they say somebody else blew up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it wasn't even them.
Wasn't even them, or they just see it, they're so distorted.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Psychology is amazing.
Exactly. Well, talk to our listeners about, I know that you've got courses that you do, and so talk a little bit about that and, what you see happening over the course of creating these things.
Well, after doing this in my office by myself, actually just me and my answering machine for about 15 years, and then my kids were growing up and didn't need me as much, I thought, you know what, I want to expand. I want to reach more people, because this was the period where things were starting to coalesce and make this beautiful sense. And so I started writing more, and I just wanted to reach more people, because I became sort of obsessed with the people who can't come in the door. Those people who have all the shame and guilt and can't get into my office. I wanted to find a way to reach them. So I started writing more. I got an assistant and an associate, so people were helping me take some of my day-to-day patients off my plate so I could do this. And so the latest iteration of that is to get it all into a program, these destructive patterns, explaining them, how to get out of them, and then packaging that all up along with my writings and videos and whatnot to emphasize the points and get that to people, those people who are too embarrassed or ashamed to get to a psychologist or psychiatrist's office.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, we're never going to not have people that come in, no matter what. There's always going to be the need for mental health care, and thankfully, it's less stigmatized than it has been. But you're right. There's always going to, there are always going to be those people that they just won't, or they need this privately, and then they could think about going. And that's the benefit of doing what you're doing. So thank you for creating those.
Well, I thank you for doing your part, because we need to be able to reach people in all different ways.
Right.
I also noticed you mentioned the stigma, and I, over the past 7 years or so, I've just focused on men because they have a double stigma. Women seem to have become more, the stigma's less with women. Women definitely will talk more about going to therapy and their therapists, but I've found men with the social stigma of having emotions. I just had a talk with one of my male patients today. It's like, we have to do it another way besides talking about my emotions. It's so effeminate to say I'm angry or something. I was like, oh, whoa, I am not wanting to castrate you, and to say I'm angry about this, we need to work it out a different way, is way less effeminate or childish than doing what you're doing, just huffing and puffing and making a big deal about something physically, hope that she figures it out, but she doesn't, so she gets frustrated. Now you're fighting. I said, believe me, it's more manly to say what you're feeling.
Yeah,
so
and I'd say to those men that are out there, because we now have a lot more male listeners. We do a lot of shows with first responders, and so we have a lot of men that come on, and I know there are female first responders too. We just happen to have interviewed quite a few men, and we get into these topics. And I always say, listen, you don't realize how much your physicality can scare someone. So while you're huffing and puffing, you don't know what this female's experience maybe has been like, or maybe what she's buried from a male that's been aggressive physically. So even you just huffing and puffing instead of just saying I'm angry, can set off a whole thing. Because I remember that with my ex-husband. He was very physically built like kind of like a football player in some ways, and he would get angry, and he never hit me or anything like that, but just the way that he would move around would scare me.
Right. I grew up with a father who punched holes in walls, and
me too.
It's not, doesn't take much of an imagination to think, well, he could punch me.
Exactly. And just being around that is frightening. So if you're extremely empathic, oh my gosh, forget it. You're feeling all that too. So, well, we could talk forever. So I'm so glad that you came on the show, and I'm glad to know that you're in the area. Can you tell our listeners where they can find out more about you?
Well, my website is drldabney.com, and that has all my writings and videos and a lot of resources on there, free resources. But I love to talk to people. I've actually been accused of answering my own phone. People go, "Why are you answering your own phone?" I like to talk to people.
I do too.
That number is 757-695-3925.
And the courses are up there too, listeners. They're really good. So suggest you go to her website and check it out. Well, Dr. Laura Dabney, thank you so much for letting me know that you wanted to come on the show and for making time to do this.
Well, thank you, Kristin, for having me. It was such fun talking to you.
Absolutely. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can find it, but I oppose it.
Good boy.